Alright, I'm going to explain my thought process and how I got to this solution for the CSS battle. This was for yesterday, the 22nd of Jan, 2026. When I first started playing this game, I would look at stuff like this and be really confused about what's going on. The only recognizable thing, CSS property I see is background, and the rest look very confusing. So I'm going to start over and show you how I would get to something like that. So in the most verbose way possible, basically. So basically what I want to do here is use a radial gradient. You would think that radial gradients can just be used to make an actual gradient, like a fading color from one color to the next. But you can define exactly where those colors change over, which means you can make a hard stop between the colors. So the first thing I'd want to do here is use a radial gradient to create this background ellipse over here. And I'd start off with that color, because that's the middle color, and then that would be the background color behind it. Okay, so first I got to give it a size. Right now it's got no size, so say 80 pixels, and then 80 pixels here. Yeah, and then you'll see if you put 80 pixels on both color stops, then you get that hard color stop instead of a gradient. And there's a shorter way to do this. You can just put a 0 at the end as well. Okay, so there we got the image. That's kind of the right thing, but we need to move it to a different position. So the way you do that is in a background image for a radial gradient, you first specify the size of the gradient. So let's just try 40 pixels, 20 pixels, and then you can check if we go 10 pixels there, that changes the size. So obviously that's the size on the y-axis, and then that's on the x-axis, or vice versa actually. See that? Well, it's the ratio here. So 20 to 20 would give us a perfect circle, and then if we did 10 to 20, that would change the ratio and give us more of an ellipse. So we want something more like this. That's kind of the right shape. The next part of this would be to position it. So we have kind of the ratio, the size of the ellipse, and then we want to position where it's going to be. So we do at, let's just try 40 pixels, 40 pixels. That's not where we want it, so we can shift it over. This is the x-axis. So maybe we try 120 and 140 or 190. And I'll use the diff here just to get it into the right position. So that looks closer. Looks like we're right on the x-axis. It seems like our ellipse is still a little bit too tall. So say we do, we've got to change the size of that. So say we try to do that to 5. That looks better. And we'll shift it a bit further down. Let's try get a better ratio for this. So yeah, that's what we want. 4 to 1 basically. That's the fraction. So that would be the same as this. Kind of the ratio of the ellipse. Okay, great, we've got our first part of this done. And then the second part of this, I would also use a radial gradient to create this shape. But I would use the body element. Most often on these challenges, it's good to use the elements that you already have. So you already have the HTML and the body elements on this page. So instead of adding divs or paragraphs or whatever, you just try to use the HTML and body element because you get those elements for free. Okay, so with the body, I'm going to want to do the same kind of thing. So I'm just going to copy and paste this down here. And then for the body, we're going to want this color in the middle. So we'll paste that in there. Okay, and then the outer color we're going to make transparent so that it doesn't overlap. what's behind us. And then for this, we don't want an ellipse. I'm just going to take all of that out for now. Default position is center. So what you can do here, say we want a circle shape. That's the first shape you want. You can either do a name or you can do like a size. So there we go. That's the solution. If I were to submit that now, I'd get 100%. The next part is optimizing this. So I'm going to go step by step. First, we remove the last stuff that we don't need. We don't need any of those closing brackets. The browser will, like closing tags, the browser will complete that for us. The next step is to shorten this. So instead of HTML, you can just do and. That'll select like the closest element, basically, which is the HTML element. That's my understanding of it, at least. And then for body, one way to do this is we use CSS nesting. So we go and then the element that's directly below HTML, the first direct child, basically, is what that's doing. So yeah, that's a way shorter way. We've got down to 189 characters. Another way to do this that's even shorter, because we've only got 2 elements on the page, so we can be less specific. We just say all elements have this, and then any element that's a child of that element has this. Cool. Gonna just delete some lines here. Another thing we can do is, instead of transparent, we can do a hex code. So say you have a 3-digit hex code that's black, and then you can use a 4-digit hex code to have your color and transparency value. So we can make the transparency 0. That's the same as transparent. Another trick we can do here is, instead of circle, we just give the shapes, kind of like how we've done here, like the ratio size of the circle. We can just do 1 pixel. So that's 1 pixel. The ratio is 1 pixel by 1 pixel. We want the smallest value possible here. So instead of doing pixels, we'll use Q. Q is like a very uncommon unit. You won't see it much in CSS, like actual CSS that you have in production, but it's really useful in CSS Golf because it's obviously one of the shortest values, like the smallest values. Okay, next thing we can do is replace these values, like 80 pixels. We can make this smaller for sure. A trick that I like to use for this is unit golf. So I'll link this in the description, but basically you put in your value in pixels and it'll spit it back out in the shortest form. So it's given us 80 pixels, and the shortest way to do that is 5 PC. PC unit in CSS would be, yeah, picker. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of obscure CSS units like this that are good to know for CSS Golf. Okay, I'm going to check. The next thing we can do, I'll go up to this gradient that's on the HTML element. And instead of using pixels over here, we can use percentage, because it's just a ratio. So this should be the same thing as 4% and 1%. Let's see if that gives us the right thing. No, not quite. Okay, we're just got to play with that value. But so we'll do 3%, 1%, because instead of being like an absolute value here, like 4 pixels, 1 pixels, the percent is in relation to the size of the viewport. So that's why we've got to make that different. Over here, what we can do is get some shorter pixel values. So go 120, and we could do 30 view width over here to get us the same thing. But what I'd like to do instead is use percentage values. The nice thing about percentage, as you can see here, we don't have to have a space in between the characters. The browser knows what we're talking about anywhere. So let's start off with percentage instead. 30% is actually perfect. And then we'll change this to say, let's just play with the value really until we get what we want. 70%. That's good. Okay, the next thing, we don't need spaces after commas. The browser knows what we're talking about, so we can delete that. We can delete that one, delete that line. Just getting rid of like excess spaces here. Okay, so yeah, we've gotten way less characters, but what we can immediately see is we've got a lot of repetition. This whole thing is being repeated. So I'd want to, instead of repeating this whole property again, I would use a CSS variable. So just put in a variable here, like variable BG for background. Then, so we just wrap this whole thing basically. So everything inside here would be a variable. And then instead of having to do background image radial gradient over here, we can just do the variable, and we get the same thing. Okay. All right. Next, okay. Now we can spot more places to optimize. We can get rid of those spots after the percentage. And then another trick that we can do here is, you'll see we've got all these characters here we can actually get rid of. We've got 2 brackets and this semicolon. So one way to get rid of this is to be clever with our selectors. So right now this targets HTML and this targets body. What we can do here is we immediately target the body, right? So HTML body, and we put our variable in there, okay? And then basically that gets closed off with that closing bracket, and then we'll have this basically is the HTML, and then we can delete all of that. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is just delete some new lines, delete all the spaces we don't need. That's really just to make it easier for us to see. The browser doesn't need to see that stuff at all. So I'm deleting all the spaces here. Okay, we've got down to 116. We're going to get down to 104. So first thing obviously is we can make this a shorter CSS variable. It doesn't have to be BG. It can be just, the shortest thing is just 1 character. So we can do that. Another trick is if you use like an absolute value over here, you don't have to use this last 0 as a closing, like as the last color stop. So we can take that out as well. All right, let's see, where's the next opportunity for optimizing? I might have to peek over to the final solution for help with this. So let's go and copy this over here. Okay, so let's see, what are we missing? Oh, we're missing 2. This doesn't have to be there. Again, we can remove those last 2 characters. Let's see where we are now. That's 110. Okay, let's see. Right, so we've got our variable here. We've got the color, we've got the size of it. 5EM and 5PC are effectively the same things in this situation, so we can swap that out. Oh yes, of course, we've got background image here, but we don't need to do that. We can just use the background shorthand. So, I mean, that basically is shorthand for the background image, and then you could put like a color or a background size, everything else that you need that relates to a background in that background shorthand. But we don't, yeah, so we'll place background image with background shorthand with that. And yeah, there we go, that's 104. That's really the shortest you can get, I think. I mean, I'm looking at the other top solutions from yesterday. Some of them are slightly different, like different ways to do the same thing, but 104 is the best you can really get to, I think. And that's it.